Howdy everyone, it's Sam. Hope you're doing really well. If you're new around here, hope I can get you to consider liking the content and subscribing to the channel. And if you are a regular around these here parts, thank you very much for the continuous support. Today, I'm going to look at Melbourne Storm's 2023 draw. And let me preface it by saying that the FIFA Women's World Cup is going to affect the Melbourne Storm's home games for approximately 6 to 8 weeks. So without further ado, let's get stuck into the Melbourne Storm's 2023 draw. Melbourne Storm have the honour of being one of the two teams selected to play on opening night, the opening fixture of the 2023 season. However, they are the away side in this matchup. They travel to CommBank Stadium in Sydney to take on beaten grand finalists of last year, the Parramatta Eels, and it's a little bit more of a level playing field as well because fullback for the Storm, Ryan Papenhuyzen, is projected to miss the opening few weeks of the season as he's over in the United States working on his knees, working on his legs, and the speediest of recoveries to Ryan Papenhuyzen. Parramatta Eels, they've had the wood over the Melbourne Storm over the past couple of years, but the Melbourne Storm in round one are not defeated in over a decade, so this is a fantastic way, no matter how you feel about either side, to start the 2023 season. Then we move into round two, and this game is taking place on a Saturday night. It is the third slot of the Super Saturday fixture for round two. The Melbourne Storm are hosting the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs down there in Melbourne. Then we move on to round three, and they're back on the plane. Melbourne Storm this time traveling to the Sunshine State, and they're taking on the Gold Coast Titans. And I think this is a danger game, especially if Ryan Papenhuyzen still remains unavailable for selection. This will also be, spoiler alert, for me, overlook for the Titans later on. This is the Gold Coast Titans' first home game of 2023, so this is going to be a trap game for the Melbourne Storm. Very much a danger game for the men from Victoria. Then they move back down to Amy Park to take on the West Tigers, and this one is a twilight fixture on Super Saturday, meaning that's the second slot. And the West Tigers, I think they got trounced by the Storm last year or the year before, but there have been a couple of instances where the Tigers, I think maybe 3 years ago, 4 years ago, got the job done. So, and the Tigers will also be a completely different beast, different animal in 2023. And then we shift over to round five. They are away again in Sydney at Sydney Olympic Park to take on the South Sydney Rabbitohs in a blockbuster on Friday night, a primetime Friday night football game. So to summarise their first 5 rounds of the 2023 season, they've got the Parramatta Eels, and then they've got the South Sydney Rabbitohs, some 2 tough competitions away from home in Sydney, and then matched in between, they've got the Bulldogs, Titans, and the Tigers. Admittedly, they're away to the Gold Coast, but those 3 sides finished bottom 5 or bottom 6 in 2022. So they'd probably see those 3 games in particular winnable games, very, very winnable games. But I do think that Gold Coast Titans game is a bit of a danger game for them. But all in all, they do have the honour of opening up the season, even though it's against a tough opposition. That's a great leg up. And then they're away to the South Sydney Rabbitohs. So there's a lot of times that they're on the plane in the first 5 rounds. But I think the best case scenario for them is undefeated, of course. But I reckon 3-2 they'd be very happy with at the end of 5 rounds. Round 6 through to round 10, they are featured heavily when it comes to blockbuster games, man. Round number 6, is Easter round, and it's on a Thursday night primetime game back home in Melbourne. So they're zigzagging for the first few weeks or first 2 months of the season. They are hosting the Sydney Roosters on a Thursday night, and the media are just going to fall in love with that. And there's a very, very strong possibility that that's going to be an all-encompassing top four clash. And then 1 week later, they're back up in Sydney on a Friday night, a primetime Friday night football game to take on the Manly Warringah Sea Eagles from 4 Pines Park. Okay, then, wow. Then they're back home again and they have a bit more of a rest. And then it is their annual traditional Anzac Day game against the New Zealand Warriors, and that's taking place Tuesday, 7 p.m. a Tuesday night Anzac Day football game. And again, I'll probably say this about every other team for the rest of the year. It is a massive shame, a massive lost opportunity that nobody but the West Tigers were able or willing enough to let go of a home game to host the New Zealand Warriors over there in New Zealand. I think that's a massive, massive shame that the Warriors do not host an Anzac Day game against the Storm in 2023. And then they have themselves a bye after the Anzac Day round. And what's funny about that, well, I don't know, what's fortuitous about that as well. Melbourne Storm, New Zealand Warriors, Roosters and Dragons, they all play on Anzac Day. And the Melbourne Storm are the team to get the bye the following round. The Roosters, Dragons, and the Warriors all got to back up and play on that Sunday. Yeah, it's a regular turnaround, I guess, from Tuesday through till Sunday. But Melbourne Storm got the luck of the draw there, getting their first bye of 2023 in round 9. After their first bye, they back it up with arguably the game of magic round up at Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane, and Melbourne Storm are technically the home side in this one. They host the South Sydney Rabbitohs in the main event slot of Super Saturday, and that's going to be a free-to-air Channel 9 game as well. To summarise Section 2 of their 2023 season, they got the Roosters, Sea Eagles, the Warriors on Anzac Day, a bye, and the South Sydney Rabbitohs. There's a lot more zigging and zagging. They're on that plane a lot more, but there's a few blockbuster games to look forward to if you're a Melbourne Storm supporter right there. Moving on now to Section 3 of 2023, something I just noticed as well is that they've been allocated as the home side 3 weeks in a row. So let me just backtrack just a cog before I continue. So we've got the Melbourne Storm being the home side against the Warriors in round 8. They have a bye. Then they're the home side against the South Sydney Rabbitohs in round number 10. And then in round 11 to start off Section 3, they are the home side once more for a Thursday night game at Amy Park against the Brisbane Broncos. So they're the home side for a month, if you want to include that bye. Then they're back on the road again. They're travelling back up to Suncorp Stadium the second time in 3 weeks to take on the Redcliffe Dolphins, and this time they are the away side. And of course, this is going to be the first time ever Dolphins will take on the Storm, or the Storm take on the Dolphins. Then the second bye of 3 for 2023 rolls about in round number 13, and that's the round where Origin players are going to be taken out of clubs, and regular club football will remain for half a schedule anyway in round 13. Round number 14 is where things get a little bit interesting with the coaching team selections. The North Queensland Cowboys are hosting the Melbourne Storm on Sunday afternoon football, free to air, and I think that's going to be a game where the Origin stars are probably not going to play. Yeah, they play on the Wednesday, but I don't think some of those players, maybe some of them will, but there'll be a few Origin stars missing from this contest as well. And then moving into round number 15, they are back at home at Amy Park on a Sunday afternoon. So they get 2 Sunday afternoon games in a row to host the Cronulla Sutherland Sharks as well. So a couple of grand final historic rematches, I guess, if you will, for lack of a really bad term. So to summarize, we've got the Broncos, Dolphins, Cowboys, and the Sharks. So a bit of a Queensland flavour. They are up at Queensland twice in back-to-back weeks. So again, they've got a home game and then they've got two away games back-to-back, but there's a bye stuck right in the middle of it all, and then they're back home in front of their home fans on a Sunday afternoon against the Cronulla Sutherland Sharks. Section 4 of 2023 starts with a trip back on the plane up to Campbelltown Sports Stadium, where they take on the West's Tigers on a Saturday night, primetime Saturday night. And I don't remember the last time the Melbourne Storm played a game out at Campbelltown Stadium, so that's going to be a rare trip for them to that part of the world. Then they have their last game 1 week later at Amy Park for a couple of months. They host the Manly Warringah Sea Eagles in the last slot of Super Saturday in round number 17. And then in round number 18, they host the Penrith Panthers on a Friday night primetime slot, but we don't know where that venue is just yet. That will be announced later on in the year. There are rumours that they could shift a game or two out to Geelong Stadium, maybe shift a couple games out to Adelaide, or maybe even take it up to their second home in Suncorp Stadium. But in any event, round 18 against the Penrith Panthers is their first official game where they have to uproot Amy Park, and they've got to uproot from Amy Park and then play a game outside of their comfort zone, I guess, for lack of a better term there as well. And then round number 19, they have their third and final bye for 2023. And then to round out section 4 of 2023, they're back on the plane to play at the Sydney Cricket Ground to play the Sydney Roosters. And you must be asking, well, what about the brand new Allianz Stadium, or Trellianz, as some people are saying? The Sydney Roosters are one of those sides that are being affected by the FIFA Women's World Cup for 2023. So to summarise, section number 4 for the Melbourne Storm this year, they're away to Sydney twice, and they host two games, but one of those games we don't know where that location is. I think that also that the Origin Stars will also be missing for one of those games. I'm looking at the Manly Sea Eagles game, and I think that might be the one, but I think that's when things start to, I think that's definitely when the fatigue starts to switch on for the Melbourne Storm. Melbourne Storm's run to the finals starts right here and now. Round 21 through until round 27, the Newcastle Knights are the first test for the Melbourne Storm, and that is away at McDonald Jones Stadium. So they have the Roosters the week before, and then they're away to the Newcastle Knights. So back-to-back New South Wales trips for the Melbourne Storm in round 20 and round 21. And then round 22, they're somewhere against the Parramatta Eels on a Friday night, a primetime slot as well. Round 24, they take on the Penrith Panthers at Bluebet Stadium on a Friday night. So that's two back-to-back Friday night primetime games for the Melbourne Storm. In round number 24, they then take on the Canberra Raiders for the first time in 2023, deep into the season, and this marks the return to Amy Park for the Melbourne Storm. This will be the first game back at Amy Park when they host the Canberra Raiders, who, as we now know, have a very, very good record down at Amy Park, where they have not been beaten since 2018. I think the stat is, or something to that effect. So that's going to be a blockbuster, hopefully, depending on the Raiders and Storm ladder positions as well. Shame it's not on free to air. It's a 2 o'clock game. But in any event, that's going to be one to look forward to. And then they play on a Saturday night 1 week later. They travel to WIN Stadium in Wollongong to take on the St. George Illawarra Dragons for the first time in 2023, deep into the season. And then their final two games have a Queensland flavour to it. Their final home game for 2023 is a Saturday 3 p.m. game against the Gold Coast Titans. And then their final game of the year is a trip back up to Queensland, back into Suncorp Stadium to take on the Brisbane Broncos on Thursday night football. In my opinion, I think sections 3 and 4, they're right in the middle of their campaign, is where things start to get tricky for the Melbourne Storm. I think that's going to be their toughest period for 2023, because I think, in my opinion, the Melbourne Storm's run home into the finals is not too bad. There are a couple of real hardcore prospects for him, like You've got the Parramatta Eels, you've got the Sydney Roosters and the Penrith Panthers, and willing on ladder positions, the Canberra Raiders. But there's games against the Dragons and the Gold Coast Titans, the Brisbane Broncos and the Newcastle Knights inside those final 7 or so weeks. So I think they're going to go 50-50 with the win-loss ratio at the very worst in their run to the finals. And then their start to the season, they're on the plane a lot. It's a lot of zigzagging, 1 week out, 1 week in, and so on and so on. But when you do all that at the very start of the season for 10 weeks in a row, and then you know that you've got a couple or a few more trips to Queensland. They've got 5, the same as the Penrith Panthers for 2023. And then you've still got to zigzag around Melbourne and then play in Sydney too, with Origin games where it might affect the club too. I think that midway part of the season is where they could struggle. They might absolutely blitz it, but I just think looking at that draw, I think it's going to become quite tough for them in 2023. But you know, Jerome Hughes isn't an Origin representative, as he is a Kiwi player. Ryan Pappenhausen may be left out of the State of Origin arena due to how massive and how talented the Origin camp is. But all in all, I think the Melbourne Storm's draw is nice. It's definitely not the easiest, but it's definitely not the toughest as well. I think they're definitely a cog above the Penrith Panthers for everyone that I've looked at so far. I think the Penrith Panthers have the easiest draw, and then just up above them is the Melbourne Storm, in my opinion. So what's your opinion on the Melbourne Storm season for 2023? What do you reckon about that draw? It's not too bad. There's nothing special that stands out about it. There's no special venues or unique games that they're having besides Anzac Day. But all in all, it's decent for the Melbourne Storm. A little bit tricky in the mid season, but that's just my opinion anyway. Thank you very much for the continuous support. Thank you for giving this video a crack, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Adios.